Smokey Roberts, featuring George Will, and our roundtable with George Stephanopoulos and Bill Kristol.
This week, Bill Clinton prepares to travel to China, the first president to do so since the 1989 massacre at Tiananmen.
All of the abuses of personal freedoms, of religious freedom, human rights. There's a long list of serious problems we have with China.
Can Clinton strike a balance between engagement and human rights? We'll ask his national security advisor, Samuel Berger, and human rights activist Harry Wu.
Okay, this is also the week that President Clinton goes to China, saying it's very important to try to reach out some more to a country that's going to be the largest economic country in the world early in the next century. Of course, critics say that this is just aiding and abetting murderers. And I think we can talk to someone right now who can give us the president's view, the secretary, or rather the attorney. I'll get it right in a moment. The National Security Advisor, Samuel Sandy Berger. Welcome. Nice to see you.
Good to be here, Sam.
And joining us, George Will, as always, in the questioning of ABC News. Mr. Berger, first question. I mean, you like to be called Sandy, right?
That's fine.
Well, what's wrong with Samuel or Sam?
Samuel's fine, too. Whatever makes you happy, Sam.
All right. Tell us what is going to make the president happy on this trip. What does he have to get from the Chinese leaders in order to prove that his policy of constructive engagement is the best policy?
Well, I think we have a great deal at stake in our relationship with China and the direction that China takes over the next 10 years. If you look at Asia, simply look at Asia alone, with nuclear testing in South Asia, with the possibility of reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula, but also great uncertainty, with the Asian financial crisis. China is critical to all of those issues, and we'll be seeking their support for policies that we believe are necessary to try to reverse the situation in South Asia and help to bring peace to Korea. On the non-proliferation side, we've made enormous progress with the Chinese in the last several years. They've signed the non-proliferation treaty. They've stopped nuclear testing, including signing the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. They've stopped their nuclear cooperation with Iran and with Pakistan. But there are still other issues that we want to raise with them, including some of their missile sales activity. And finally, we have to raise and want to raise the serious differences that we have with China. We want to raise them forthrightly, both privately with the Chinese and publicly in the remarks the president makes while he's there.
Well, the critics say the president has to raise that issue of human rights forcefully, publicly. How's he going to do it? The welcoming ceremony in Tiananmen Square does not lend itself to anyone making speeches. But right after the two presidents meet in their first bilateral in the Great Hall of the People, they do speak to the press. Will he raise it then?
Well, there will be a number of opportunities, obviously, for the president to speak.
But I'm asking about that one, Mr.
Well, I don't want to script the entire trip here at this point, but there will be a number of opportunities for the president to speak, and he will talk to a range of issues, and he certainly will talk to human rights, to his vision of how China must give its people greater freedom if it wants to achieve its full potential, and he will talk, I believe, to the events of June 1989, and if he does so, he'll be the first leader, I believe, to have done so in China.
You have said that this greeting ceremony on Tiananmen Square is simply protocol, that for 600 years the Chinese have greeted their leaders there, but when it has been to their disadvantage, they have not. When Gorbachev came and there were all those students in the square, they had the greeting ceremony at the airport just because it was inconvenient for them. This time, couldn't the president say it's inconvenient for him?
Well, Tiananmen is, for the Chinese, for the past 600 years, has been the center of their political and civic life. And this is traditionally where official arrival ceremonies take place, actually not in the square, but in front of the Great Hall of the People. This is where President Reagan had his arrival ceremony in 1984.
But that was before 1989.
1984, and most recently, Prime Minister Netanyahu and every leader that I know of that has visited China. I think whether the president has an arrival ceremony in Tiananmen Square or a block down the street does not change the facts of June 1989. It is incumbent upon the president, I believe, to address those facts, and we should not confuse protocol or being respectful to China's tradition with compromising our beliefs or our principles or being unwilling to speak to them.
You say that the president has to address the question of human rights, but when you look at the list of things, it's really quite remarkable. You've got religious leaders in jail, probably to the tune of about 500 of them. Recently, a Catholic bishop arrested, a Catholic church razed. You have this whole horrible story of criminals being shot and then their organs harvested and sold abroad. You have the abortion policies. I mean, this isn't just a little human rights problem, is it?
There's no, China is an authoritarian, one-party state which does not afford its people the civil liberties that you and I take for granted here. That's not a dispute. The question is, what is the best way that we can affect change? I believe the best way we can affect change is not to ignore China, not to walk away from China, but to be engaged with China, to speak to them directly, to be very forthright about it, as the president was when President Zhang was here in the United States, and he stood next to him and said, China on these issues is on the wrong side of history. We've had some results from this. Dissidents have been released. Wei Zhishang, Wang Dong. I just heard today that Wang Dong's parents are being given a visa to come over and visit him here. Bishop Zhang. The Chinese have agreed recently to sign the covenant on civil and political rights of the UN, which will allow a whole regime of monitoring. We should not either glorify China by any means, nor should we demonize it. The question is, how are we most effective? And I believe we're most effective by dealing with them forthrightly and on a principled basis.
Well, let's continue with forthright dealings about, say, organ transplants. There was quite gripping testimony about this policy in Congress. How do you do it? What does the president say to them? Shouldn't you quit harvesting organs? I mean, what do you say to people like this?
It is obviously abhorrent. It is against Chinese law. We are certainly aware of situations in which that law has been violated, and we will continue to press the Chinese to enforce their law.
But again, tell me give us, be concrete. How do you press a regime like that? Does the president say, it's against your laws, cut it out?
No, I think the president has, when President Zhang was here, George, they spent 2 hours in the residence talking about human rights, probably the only time that's been done with President Zhang. And the president talked about how China needs to evolve if it seeks to realize its full potential as a nation.
But that's at a certain...
Let me finish. Yeah. And it needs to give its people rights of expression, rights of political participation. It can't be a great economic nation and a political pygmy. It has to grow in both ways. So you do it through constantly pressing them, and I believe we will do that. We have done that. I believe it has produced some results. I'm not satisfied, nor is the president, with the state of human rights in China. But I think we need to be engaged for that, and because we have other interests in China.
I don't want to beat this to death, but it's one thing to have a theory of history. You need to be democratic to prosper economically. It's another thing to deal with a certain level of abstraction. But how do you press a regime to quit harvesting people's organs and killing them for that purpose? Do you talk about it specifically?
Sure. And I think you talk about it specifically, and I think you also, I mean, as China is increasingly open through emails and satellites and faxes and all sorts of other devices, 2.5 million Chinese people traveling abroad this year, unthinkable a few years ago. They will be exposed to the overall standards of the international community.
As part of the Reagan administration's policy of giving a final push for the transformation of the Soviet regime, during his trip to Moscow, Ronald Reagan had a dinner at Spasow House, and he mixed government officials and dissidents, same tables. Now, you say that when you go to China, the president will meet a broad cross-section of people. Will that include dissidents?
George, we will decide and make those judgments based upon what we think.
Surely they've been made already.
What we think will be most effective in terms of achieving our objective.
They've not been made already?
Not all arrangements have been made for the trip, but in general, we will make our decisions based upon how we think we will best advance the process of change in China.
Mr. Berger, you say the president will speak out about the events of 1989 in Tiananmen Square. What will he say? Will he simply say something like, we all regret what happened? Or will he say that was wrong and we don't expect you to ever do it again?
Let's not fast forward the next 2 weeks. I think that he will address human rights in general. He will address the
Don't you think people will be
events of
watching to
June.
see what his tone is? And it won't be good enough to just say, well, we brought up the subject. A lot of people would expect him to bring it up forcefully and very directly.
I guess my answer is judge us after the fact rather than before the fact.
Could we just bring up Kosovo very quickly? There's new fighting, apparently, in Kosovo. Milosevic went to Moscow. Yeltsin talked to him. You were going to watch to see what happened. What do you think has now happened?
Well, I think the agreements that Milosevic made in Moscow were a step in the right direction, but inadequate. We would like to see not only an end to the violence, a withdrawal of Serbian forces from the area, and negotiations towards a solution. And we will continue to press for that. We're proceeding both on the diplomatic track. Ambassador Holbrooke will be going back there this week, and we will proceed on the NATO track with planning.
Early in the administration, in this first administration, Kosovo was the line in the sand, and that if there was aggression in Kosovo, that was cause for the United States to act. Is that no longer the case?
We have not ruled out any option whatsoever.
Koki used the phrase aggression. How do you have aggression in Kosovo when it is part of Serbia?
Well, there has certainly been on the part of President Milosevic indiscriminate violence against the Kosovo people, which threatens not only Kosovo, but sovereign nations that are adjacent to it.
One very quick question.
George.
President, how credible is the NATO option if NATO won't act, as a number of its members say, without a UN authorization, and the Russians would be up to veto a UN authorization?
I don't think we had the final word from either from whether Russia would veto a resolution or whether our allies, when push comes to shove, if the situation becomes very bad, would block NATO from acting.
Thank you very much, Samuel Sandy Berger,
Thank
the
you, Sam.
President's National Security Advisor, for being with us. Please come again.
Hello.
And coming up next, more on the President's trip to China with human rights activist Harry Wu.
Human rights activist and former political prisoner in China, Harry Wu, thank you very much for being with us this morning. You've just heard the President's National Security Advisor say he will do something in China about the issue of human rights, but he wouldn't tell us what. What would you like to see the President do?
Well, first of all, I heard President give a speech at National Geographic Society, and she said, we want to see a stable, open, and prosperous China. First of all, I want to comment on what is meaning of stable. If stable is the term of stability applied to a society, we don't want to see chaos. We don't want to see starvation and killing. I think everybody agrees with it. But if this is a term applied to a communist regime, what does that mean? We never applied the term of stability to Soviet Union, even today to Cuba. Why want to see a stable communist regime?
And what's your answer to that?
President Clinton said, if you disagree my engagement policy, that means you want to apply isolation. This is too cheap to argue. Today, there's nobody talking about isolation. Between isolation and engagement, there's something in the middle.
And so there's something in the middle. The President's going, so it's not isolation. So what should he do when he gets there
Well, if you
make
really
a
want to
statement?
engage with China, not only engage by money, by investment, engage by human rights, engage by American principles.
So should he meet with dissidents? Should he go to a house church service? What should he do?
First of all, he should not show himself at the Tiananmen Square. Is any American leader willing to show themselves with Stalin or Gorbachev or Brezhnev at Red Square? It's a fundamental problem. Chinese just want that with the first country leaders at Tiananmen Square and give the message to Chinese people, Tiananmen massacre is over. We're stable.
The defenders of the President's policy and of the trade first and economic aid or involvement with China first policy say that that will destabilize the Chinese regime in a creative way, that you can't have a tumultuous market, contract-driven consumer society with a totalitarian regime?
I agree that the money and the investment can improve the living condition and change the whole society. But this is a one-side story. Because the profit from the trade, profit from the investment, not only benefit the common people, also benefit the communist regime. That's why the communist government today have so much money, upgrade their military facility, and put a lot of money in the control of the people. We have to be aware about it. Since Nixon, 72, visit China until 1996, 25 years, the relation between China and the United States, not bad. Suddenly, our Navy flew to Taiwan Strait, respond to Chinese military maneuver. What is that? This is a kind of military-faced military. And you will see the next couple of 5 or 10 years, that situation become more serious.
The meeting in Tiananmen Square, the symbolic greeting there, will not be a rhetorical event. But can you suggest to the president some gesture, some appropriate thing he might do in Tiananmen Square that would take some of the sting out of this?
If today Clinton stand with communist leader in Tiananmen Square, I wish he can say, we remember the massacre. We will not forget about it. We want to see it will not happen in the history. We want to see a democracy China.
In the visit that President Reagan paid to the Soviet Union then, he did in fact go to Red Square, not with Brezhnev, he was dead, but with Gorbachev. You could argue that's a different time and Soviet Union was falling apart. But it is true that past leaders have done pretty much what the host country wants them to do. So is it really that terrible that the president is doing what he claims every other leader, including the leader of Israel, leader of Italy and others, the former leader of Britain, have done?
The president of the United States is very different from the other leader for the world. I think you have to be aware of this issue. And I think we should not only focus on recent trade, recent things. We need the long-term China policy. Okay, we have to look forward. Last year, Jiang Zemin visited China. This year, Clinton visited China. I'm sorry, visited the United States, and Jiang Zemin and Clinton visited the United States. The leading the people say, what is our China policy? Because when you mention China's economic giant, hey, this is a communist giant.
Well, the administration says the China policy is constructive engagement, a term made popular recently in our past in dealing with South Africa, and that by trying to engage China, we'll bring China into our way of thinking.
Just like Samuel mentioned that to release some of the dissidents. The exile itself is a violation of human rights. Exile dissident, that doesn't mean the human rights being improved. From the Soviet Union, Poland, communist Poland, they exiled the dissidents in the Cold War. Did we applaud them? Why today the Chinese exiled the dissidents say, oh, this is an improvement? It's a kind of incredible. I think we have to talk about these things. We want to see a prosperous, peaceful, freedom China, not communist China.
Okay.
It's a long-term policy. We have to think it about. I think next few years, we have to debate on this issue. What is our real policy? Engage only by money? Only engage by money, it means appeasement policy. If your policy, foreign policy, didn't complain on moral basis, there's a typical hypocritic and appeasement policy. Okay. And appeasement never improve human rights in this country, never make peace.
Okay, Mr. Wu, thank you so very much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming next.